Welcome to the age of iPad kids. Gen Z, we're told, is terrified by the prospect of raising a generation of children who are slaves to their iPads. The term iPad kids is commonly used to describe children who are raised without any restrictions on their screen time, and the topic, ironically enough, gained significant traction on TikTok amongst TikTok kids. There is now a whole genre of TikTok videos that have garnered millions of views, where users openly criticize and ridicule the behaviors of iPad kids, throwing tantrums when the devices are taken away, displaying a complete disinterest in engaging with others, lacking the ability to play with traditional toys, etc. But behind all the sarcasm and dark humor lies a whole host of uncomfortable truths about where our society is going. The kids of today are bad, but the kids of tomorrow will be living a life we can't even think of. Generation Alpha is something we don't want to think about. But what's actually going to happen to these kids in the future? But to understand what's going to happen and why iPad kids are such a terrifying phenomena, we need to look at how things were a few decades ago. It wasn't long ago when it was normal for children to play outside, unsupervised for extended periods of time, specifically to play with other kids from their neighborhoods. Your parents probably did the same, all for extended periods of time, completely unsupervised, playing sports, building forts and climbing trees. And doing this helped children develop useful skills for their adult years. They learned how to communicate, how to negotiate, how to delegate, how to defend themselves, how to make friends, and the importance of teamwork. It helped them develop lifelong friendships. Play helped these children develop as humans to become, as the author Nicholas Taleb said, anti-fragile. It fostered creativity. Play, along with other key components like community, traditional family values, and religion, helped form what philosopher Peter Berger called a sacred canopy, an invisible structure that stretched over society, providing a shield that protects people from the uncertainties and cruelties of life. Outdoor, unsupervised play helped create better citizens and in turn, a better society. However, in the early 80s, outdoor unsupervised play became far less frequent, replaced instead by closely monitored trips to the park and heavily supervised playdates. By 1997, the year Generation Z officially began, the days of widespread unstructured play were officially dead. And fast forward to today, and outdoor unsupervised play has almost been entirely replaced by indoor unsupervised screen time, and family time replaced by screen time. Today's children suffer from nature deficit disorder, a term coined by author Richard Louv.
We're creating an environment in which I believe, by definition, they are less alive. What parent wants their child to be less alive? What teacher wants their students to be less alive?
At the same time, rates of childhood conduct disorder, a precursor to psychopathy, continues to increase. This worrying rise is completely connected to a lack of unsupervised play and the fact that more and more parents are outsourcing their role as primary caregivers. And outsourcing to who? Well, the people who control the algorithms. Artificial intelligence like Siri, Alexa, and a whole host of other artificial creations that have zero interest in protecting the most vulnerable, and instead using them as pawns to advertise to, mold, and create into the ideal people for Amazon, Apple, or whatever big tech company. In truth, these advanced algorithms target babies and toddlers, identifying their weaknesses and exploiting them mercilessly, so as they grow up they're always dependent on their tablets, and the effects of this will be disastrous for society. But the problem is today it's more and more tempting to rely on screens. Parents today have so many things to do. Both parents usually work now because no one has any money anymore, and so when parents come back exhausted, it's just so much easier to give their kid an iPad, while the parents can relax for an hour or two. But ongoing research consistently highlights the long-term effects of excessive screen time on kids. Such effects include memory impairment, reduced emotional control, heightened levels of apathy and anxiety, lower levels of empathy, delays in speech and language development, and even criminal behavior. And when parents aren't watching their young ones, sexual predators are. And I mean that quite literally, but more on that later. In 2017, psychologist Dr. Jean M. wrote for The Atlantic that Generation Z has in many ways been destroyed by the rise of smartphones. And we all know this. Generation Z is more anxious, more depressed, more suicidal, less likely to date, less likely to have sex, less likely to venture outside, less likely to have any friends, less likely to talk to family members, more lonely, more isolated, and more depressed. Generation Z is down bad. We all can see this. It's a horrific transformation in the last few decades that has created the generation we see today. But just think of Generation Alpha, i.e. the iPad kids, who are going to be even sicker, dumber, sadder, and more lonely than Generation Z is today. Not to mention fatter. You see, children in the past would engage in hours of play every day, which not only allowed them to burn calories and maintain their physical fitness, but also facilitated social interaction, enhanced cognitive abilities, and alleviated stress. However, as playtime has diminished, all aspects of childhood development have been negatively affected, with the consequences on health and obesity being particularly concerning. The association between increased screen time and obesity is undeniable. More screen time activity tends to go hand in hand or hand in mouth with higher food consumption and less long-term gratification. Multiple studies have demonstrated that prolonged screen exposure actually leads to a heightened desire for food and increased snacking habits amongst children and teenagers. And to compound this, studies show that the most obese children go on to become obese adults. In fact, about 55% of kids who are obese during their childhood will continue to be obese during their adolescence, ostracizing them even further. That's why it's now estimated that around 80% of adolescents who are obese will still be obese when they reach adulthood, ostracizing them further and further, making them more unhealthy, making them have less testosterone, and less ability to actually enjoy life as they should be. And if you don't believe me, most children now have a cell phone by the age of 7. Just look around you. So many kids at restaurants everywhere you go are on their iPads or their iPhones, going online for hours at a time, doing things that their parents are completely oblivious to, fueling a huge mental health epidemic for children, which is why in recent years, there have been record levels of sadness and self-harm within kids. Instagram in particular has been found to have detrimental effects on mental well-being. A study investigating the frequency of Instagram use revealed a strong link between its usage and various negative outcomes such as depression, lower self-esteem, appearance anxiety, and body dissatisfaction. Millions of children as young as 10 use Instagram and are regularly bombarded with sexualized imagery and traumatizing self-harm footage, not to mention always feeling insecure compared to the people who live better lives than you, or at least they seem to. So is it any wonder that kids today are so miserable if we're setting them up like this in the first place? Their innocence is being ripped away from them at such a young age and replaced with something truly awful. Even YouTube Kids, designed specifically to cater to children as young as 4, is really not safe at all. The application has been shown to offer children content of a sexual nature, as well as material focusing on alcohol and drug consumption, predator content and other strange things really not meant for 4-year-olds. More recently, a number of reports have emerged regarding harmful material on YouTube that specifically targets children as young as 2.
We have isolated some of these so people can understand exactly what we're talking about. On the left of the screen, there's the real episode of Peppa Pig when Peppa goes to the dentist, and on the right, that fake that you're talking about, fear, torturous appearance. And here's another example that we pulled from Paw Patrol, which you mentioned, firefighter to the rescue, and then on the right, the fake, the crash, the death, the fear.
Basically, nefarious individuals have tampered with content from popular and cherished children's franchises, including well-known shows like Peppa Pig, Nickelodeon's Paw Patrol, and Disney's Frozen. These perpetrators have inserted inappropriate and unsettling content featuring beloved characters, causing subliminal trauma to unsuspecting toddlers. And these are the people bringing up children today. When you get parents out or they come back from work all tired and exhausted, they just give the iPad to the kid who is then raised by these predators. The girls seem to have it way worse than the boys. It's just more and more we find out how bad social media really is for women in particular. We've all seen these articles like teen girls are facing a mental health epidemic, teen girls report record levels of sadness, American teen girls are not okay, each one loaded with these horrific stories and weird side effects. And in recent times, psychological professionals have seen a huge rise in individuals seeking help for mental health disorders and symptoms resembling Tourette's syndrome. And it's coming out more and more that TikTok's actually to blame here, as these are now being called TikTok tics, where young individuals, particularly young girls, are manifesting symptoms of various disorders due to exposure to social media influencers who themselves exhibit these symptoms. TikTok tics are distinct from what medical professionals usually see in patients with Tourette's. They're an example of mass sociogenic illness, or mass hysteria, where behaviors, emotions, or conditions spread spontaneously within a group, including online groups. Moreover, the more time individuals, especially girls, spend on social networking websites, the more likely they are to experience psychological distress and even contemplate ending their life. With 60% of young girls claim they have now experienced bullying online as well, just compounding the mental health epidemic even worse. Is it any wonder that Gen Alpha is doomed? If Generation Z is as messed up as it is today, what's the generation of iPad kids going to look like in 20 years? Especially when screens and social media are not only ruining their mental health, but also making them devoid of any emotion in the first place. You see, there isn't just a rise in TikTok tics, but social media sites like TikTok and YouTube are actually shown to increase psychopathy. Now, psychopaths, otherwise known as people who suffer from antisocial personality disorder, are characterized by their coldness, manipulativeness, antisocial nature, and narcissistic tendencies. And of all the people in society, they tend to be some of the most toxic, doing whatever is needed to get what they want when they want it. Society and your well-being is of no importance. They will do anything they can to get whatever they want. And this disorder is often associated with early childhood encounters such as maltreatment and rejection. And yes, you probably guessed it, extensive use of screens and social media. To be diagnosed with psychopathy, one must be over the age of 18. Before 18, a child is diagnosed with something called conduct disorder, a severe behavioral problem which often involves aggression and law-breaking tendencies. And the research clearly shows that childhood CAD symptoms are significantly associated with greater daily social media use during emerging adulthood, and that more daily social media use is significantly associated with various antisocial behaviors. Antisocial conduct in childhood is a strong predictor of criminal behavior in adulthood. And if you think about it, our society already in the West list is designed to promote the most psychopathic of all. The most greedy, narcissistic are rewarded the most. And this hamster wheel is only going to increase, especially with screen time hampering our capacity to interpret facial expressions and acquire social skills, both of which are crucial elements of cultivating empathy. And once social media removes empathy from the human equation, and you quickly find yourself surrounded by a large amount of Patrick Bateman-like people, the most virtue-signaling, empty, vacuous, plastic people, who have no care for the society that has brought them up or the people around them. Just more instant gratification, more dopamine. This is the generation of iPad kids. And of course, not everyone's going to be a psychopath, of course not. It's an incredibly rare thing in the first place. But the lack of empathy and growing narcissism that growing up on an iPad causes is a really worrying sign, especially when you look at modern day influencers today, the people actually raising your children. You see more and more influencers are always there in your child's life now. They're the ones on your screen, the ones trend-jacking TikTok, the ones setting the culture of today. And when you look at the biggest influencers now who flaunt their opulent lifestyles and endorse things like OnlyFans, are these really the people you want raising your children? The Adam 22s, Logan Pauls, Neons of the world. All of these shallow, superficial beings who fills kids' head with idiotic, sometimes dangerous ideologies. And worryingly, as more and more studies show, influencers are having a profound impact on the psyche of kids, shaping their ideologies through the spread of distorted, emotionally charged narratives, propagating materialistic wealth, greed, self-absorption, and just bottom of the bucket behavior. Your daughter's being raised by Cardi B, Ruby Rose, Sexy Red, rapping about their genitals and the glories of promiscuity, warping little children everywhere with the impression of what others actually find attractive. Boys who are told to get more hoes, to get more money, to neglect culture and tradition, and screw everyone over. Children who are influenced by adult content at such early ages. I'm not even kidding, today kids as young as 9 are regularly exposed to adult content. And this is not the adult content of your parents' time. We all know what this is. It's the most degenerate, debauched content imaginable. Compilations of the worst things you can think of, completely destroying your children's dopamine. Because in our society, people are just too tired and overworked to even have the time to raise their children properly anymore. So giving them an iPad to numb them just seems like the easier option today. But when you really think about what's going on here, when you really think about what they're being influenced by, the fact that children everywhere are watching this kind of content before they've even had their first kiss, what is this doing to children's brains? Well, not only is it ruining their attention span and their empathy, but it also has detrimental effects on their developing prefrontal cortex, a region of the brain responsible for rational decision making and impulse regulation. Consequently, when this area is compromised, children are prone to displaying impulsive behavior and making even worse decisions. Without a fully functioning prefrontal cortex, a human runs the risk of living life full of recklessness and poor choices. Even the iPads given out in schools aren't safe. There's just more and more stories emerging involving young children, third graders, being given unfiltered iPads and being fed the most disturbing material by these algorithms. Although Apple's screen time was introduced in 2018 to stop this very sort of behavior, with restrictions ostensibly designed to help parents and educators, it's usually never that effective. Children can just easily circumvent these minor obstacles and end up accessing the most depraved content you can think of. New research from Imperial Software shows that 1 in 4 young students have watched harmful or violent content online while in the classroom, and 17% were watching it on a school device. And even 1 in 10 children have used gambling sites through these iPads. And again, to be clear, all in the classroom. If all this isn't depressing enough though, there's one thing that's even worse than a generation of iPad kids. Predators exploiting Generation Alpha. Now this happens with every generation, and they say that in a city, you're never more than 6 feet away from a rat. But online it seems children are never more than 6 clicks away from a predator. You see, social media has in many ways created a safe haven for predators who can hide behind fake profiles and lure unsuspecting children into potentially life-destroying, even life-ending traps. Now, the Wall Street Journal published an extensive report showing how Instagram connects a vast predator network around the globe. And although Instagram users are supposed to be at least 13, many users are as young as 10. And this number is going down and down as more and more kids get iPads. And unbeknownst to them, that young child they are communicating with is in fact a 58-year-old man with the most vile intentions imaginable. Meanwhile, TikTok, the most popular social media platform in existence, has been called the perfect platform for predators. Now, we all know the online world is crawling with monsters, the type of people who specialize in destroying children's lives. A recent study conducted by Israeli and American cybersecurity experts reveals that predators who contact kids through social media exploit security breaches to secretly activate their webcams without the knowledge or consent of the children. And at the same time, there's been a huge increase in cases of children falling prey to online extortion. sextortion, the criminal act of manipulating children who are then coerced into sharing explicit images of themselves with abusers. These abusers then threaten to distribute the pictures if a ransom is not paid to them.
Sexual predators are on a new playground here, targeting kids by chatting with them while they play popular video games.
CBS 8's Anna Marie McNichol working for you with how parents can protect their kids from becoming victims.
Where children are spending their time online, predators are lurking.
And disturbingly, an increasing number of reported content now involves the most severe category A images. And even more worryingly, is that children are now able to use iPads to access the dark web so easily. Now, as many of you may know, that the dark web consists of a hidden collective of internet sites, only accessible by a specialized web browser, Tor, where people can then sell various items and services, anything illegal that you want. And it recently emerged that an 8-year-old child used his iPad to access the dark web and buy a number of ridiculously dangerous items, including an AK-47. The gun even arrived to his house, with the mother eventually handing it over to the police. But this brought up an uncomfortable discussion here. If kids are being raised by iPads, they will see every corner of the internet, and accessing the dark web on an iPhone or iPad is remarkably easy. And once a child does so, he or she enters a world where their safety and innocence becomes endangered almost instantly. You see, 1 in 50 children are affected by child identity fraud, and more than half of victims are children under 9 years old. So what makes a child's identity so attractive? Well, it's likely because their social security number and credit history represents a clean slate that may remain untouched and potentially unchecked for possibly quite a few years, even decades. And if the theft goes unnoticed, a criminal could utilize a child's social security number to establish a credit history over an extended period. And this deception may remain concealed until the child seeks a driver's license, employment, or financial assistance for education. One thing that won't be rare with Generation Alpha and iPad kids especially is the rise of involuntary celibates, lonely, sex-starved young men, embittered by a sense of romantic failure, who find each other in communities online. You see more and more with things like Tinder, with Instagram, with adult content. All of this stuff is affecting the mental health of everyone everywhere, but especially Generation Alpha, as I've already discussed. But one thing this does is create a lack of community and cohesion. You never get to connect with people your age, and the more this happens, especially to Generation Alpha, the more involuntary celibates you get. People who can't interact with the other sex because they've never been socialized properly. And this ties in with a huge drop in testosterone levels amongst young men. In fact, prolonged social media use actually lowers testosterone levels in males.
It's been shown that social media can cause the lowering of testosterone levels.
That's affecting their sex drive and mood. More and more males are struggling with depression, anxiety, and loneliness. And this completely coincides with the drop in testosterone. Now, there's so many factors for this, and I've discussed this multiple times on this channel. And whilst there's the food, the water, the hormones in our environment, social media and digital devices are also draining the masculine vigor out of young men, rendering them limp, lifeless, loathsome, and lonesome. In fact, the average teen today is now spending up to 6 hours per day doom scrolling their lives away, and probably far more on their computer as well. And so just imagine a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old kid getting addicted to these algorithms from such a young age, getting their dopamine fried by these devices. By the time they're 18, they're already a full-on social media addict, with their brain fried, wasting their lives away looking at pixels. By the time they're 18, most children now in Generation Alpha will have probably spent close to 5 years completely online. And I mean that literally in the time spent looking at the devices. What does this do to a healthy human being? Is it any surprise that Generation Alpha will get angrier, fatter, dumber, lonelier? Things are bad now, but sadly things are only going to get worse here if parents continue to bring up their children with iPads. And the sad fact is that most parents don't know any of this stuff. They have no idea the consequences because they never experienced this themselves, and it's so much easier giving a kid an iPad than taking them out to do sports, which means a whole new generation is emerging. That's why Generation Alpha may very well prove to be the most problematic generation in all of human history. Especially with the rise of AI, an iPhone moment on steroids, where will this put Generation Alpha? Those born between 2012 and the mid-2020s will grow up in a world where AI assistants, not mum and dad, will reign supreme. We already have people marrying pixelated characters. Human relationships are dying out. AI is just adding fuel to the fire here. And as humans spend less and less time interacting in the real world and more time immersed inside virtual ones, AI partners may very well replace human ones. And as the iPads grow up, we may very well be living in idiocracy in just a few decades.